Hey everybody, welcome to the Wisdom Distillery. This is Shaman John, your host. In this podcast, we're going to interview Mansal Denton. He's a serial entrepreneur and a neural hacking nerd. He's got a new book, a new movie, and a lot of things to say. So enjoy. Hey, welcome to another podcast. Today we're here with Mansal Denton. Mansal is an epic entrepreneur, from my view. Has started several businesses now, right? Mm-hmm. How many?
At least, well, I mean, it depends on how many, if you want to consider all the failed ones. But
of course,
if you want to talk about the failed ones, then you're probably up to like a dozen at this point. Some of which didn't get past a few weeks, but couple that did well.
You got to try.
Yeah.
What are you most famous for in your community?
I think right now I'm the founder of Nootropedia, which is a online web portal for peak mental performance. Mm-hmm. And I have a YouTube channel with a few thousand followers and 20,000 email subscribers. So I put out a lot of content around peak mental performance, and people seem to like it.
What drew you to that subject matter? Because I know that, you've been into self-betterment for quite a while now. Yeah,
self-betterment as a whole came from my experience getting arrested and ultimately going to prison. The specific nootropics and peak mental performance was kind of an offshoot of that. Mm-hmm. It was a combination of trying to improve myself mentally, improve my decision making, in addition to my interest in physiology and science and the brain. So they kind of combined to create this nootropics enthusiast.
This is an interesting subject because we have a lot of discussions in some of my other circles about what chemically affects bad decision making. Like people just say, well, it's just, you're just making bad choices, right? And then there was the whole Twinkie defense that came about and some years ago about, my client was under the influence of mad amounts of sugar because of Twinkies and they couldn't help themselves, whatever. But more and more, you start to come up with some real evidence that certain chemicals in the brain, whether they be from food or just pharmaceuticals, are really having a horrific impact on people's behavior patterns. And what are your thoughts on that based on the research that you've obviously spent in that world so far?
Yeah, at the end of the day, everything is biochemical. Even emotions are a cascade of chemicals that, if somebody we've all had this experience with romantic love where, either there's some feeling of rejection or something along those lines. The whole body feels it. The heart is racing. There's all kinds of side effects that are physical and mental. These are hormonal, biochemical changes purely from an emotion. So
totally,
no matter what the case is, there's going to be some kind of biochemical signature. Oftentimes men are considered to be, the ones making bigger mistakes, riskier mistakes. I myself made, dumb mistakes when I was younger, and there's plenty of, I think, strong morals are the foundation for anything, but by the same token, at a young age, young males' brains are not well developed, and there's tons of testosterone, which is, just creates completely different decision making patterns.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think drove your early behavior patterns? Do you feel like nurture, nature, chemistry? What do you think? What do you think got you in trouble? Let's just say that.
Well, simply, just taking responsibility. It was some greed and fear.
Yeah.
It was kind of a combination of those two.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, there was a girl in Switzerland that I felt like I desperately needed to be with. And
It's always a girl.
right, and I stole some historical documents and sold them so that I could go be with her.
Wow.
And
That's a movie in the making.
right, yeah. And unfortunately, it wasn't the right way about doing that.
Sure.
And I realized much later that it was also driven by fear, because there's plenty of awesome girls, and
Right.
there's,
Scarcity complex.
exactly.
Totally.
Yeah, it was definitely a fear-based decision, and so that's where a lot of the more philosophical self-betterment comes from. But I'm sure there's all kinds of a biochemical cascade of hormones in a teenage male who
Oh yeah.
desperate to reproduce in some way.
So what do you think in terms of how you've changed your life and the getting into, I know you had a supplement company for a while. Do you still have that? Did you sell your portion of that away, or what did you do with that?
Yeah, I sold that a couple years ago.
Okay.
And it did really well. I still have a good relationship with the people who purchased the company, but the the physical handling of the supplements and the manufacturing just kind of didn't allow me to do what I wanted to do, which was actually educate.
Right.
And so I kind of let that go.
What are you taking away from now, this new business, and I'm assuming that you are partaking in the products that you're slinging and talking to people about. What are you noticing as a byproduct of that in your life?
Well, I noticed that it's incredibly complex, and I think that's where I've actually grown a lot of popularity, because one company can say take a pill, and it's really romantic to believe that there is a magic pill that can solve problems.
Right.
But the reality is, which I found through self-experimentation and coaching clients one-on-one, is just that everybody is so unique. Each day is unique. Each situation is unique. Each task for work might be unique. So one day somebody might need creative, mental energy, sometimes concentration. So it's a multifaceted approach that one has to have when it comes to optimizing their brain, and that comes down to all kinds of lifestyle habits, including like sleep and circadian rhythms and exercise and just a host of different things. So the further I go down the rabbit hole, the more I realize it's more and more complex.
Do you ever find, I have been historically fairly skeptical about a lot of stuff, period. Like whether it's the wonders of pharmaceutical medicine or energy medicine or all that kind of stuff. But I do kind of come down to some fundamental realities, which are, one is the placebo effect, which I have always thought and I remember, I think the first time I really got a grip on the placebo effect was from an episode of MASH, oddly enough, that's going way back, essentially in the hospital where they ran out of morphine, and so they used what they had, and then they did sugar pills or something like that, and they told the people who they didn't give morphine to that they were getting morphine, but of course it was not morphine, just because they knew about the placebo effect, and they thought if it works on anybody, that's a win. And of course, in the show that it did work on some percentage of the people, and so to me it's fascinating. It's not a surprise because there's no real profit motive in getting people dialed in with their own inner pharmacy, where the possibility of them really having the capacity within their own DNA to solve a whole host of chemical issues by just the body rebalancing as it does, and actually being more in control of that as opposed to it being involuntary. So and what you're just talking about, the sort of complexity of it all, it's hard to measure, in my view, the validity of those things. You know, like how much are they really impacting? How much of that is your own body and your expectations? What do you think about that? Like, what's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I think, all the studies are theoretical. Most of the studies are on disease model patients.
Mm-hmm.
So there's very little in terms of evidence in favor of enhancing abilities beyond the baseline.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, we're kind of lacking in science. And so it's very much in the Wild West in terms of, what you're trying to improve for yourself. As long as one is using nootropics and they're doing so safely, they're not taking like the strongest stimulants.
Right.
I have a few views on that. One is placebo effect. It works. It works.
Right,
Doesn't
exactly.
matter whether it's,
whether the drugs did it or your own mind did it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the studies actually show placebo is like up to a 30% boost. So many drugs have to be, perform above a 30% threshold in order to have any kind of validity.
Right.
And many of these do, but really it's a matter of it comes down to testing, seeing that the placebo works or doesn't work. There's a ton of technologies coming online that we're able to determine whether certain nootropics work for you particularly. I'll give you an example. I went out to Los Angeles to the Peak Brain Institute where they do brain maps with QEEG.
Yeah.
And I had a neuroscientist take a look at my brain after I took one of my favorite nootropics called phenylparastam. And he was able to clearly show like all the different markers that were improved as a result of taking this simple nootropic. So at least for me, I know that there's some kind of
something's going on.
Yeah, some kind of empirical data for that. And like I said, the technologies are going to become more ubiquitous as they become cheaper. They're going to become more effective. So people are going to be able to do these tests on their own to see whether things make a difference. And that's what I'm really excited about, because for the past few decades, we've really kind of outsourced our health mentally, physically, etc. to doctors and to other people, and it's kind of a fear-based approach to health, because we're scared that we don't know what we're
screw
doing.
It up.
Exactly, and so the doctors know better. But the truth is, we're coming into a world where information's ubiquitous, technology is cheaper and more accessible than ever, and so we kind of have this responsibility to take our mental performance into our own hands, not because doctors are necessarily wrong. I have my opinions on the medical model and big pharma, but they just cannot account for your unique individuality.
Right.
There's things that about yourself from the past how many ever years you've been around, where that nobody can tell you otherwise, because you're like, no, I have experience in my own system.
I know my skin.
Right. Yeah.
So what has been the biggest surprise, on this journey for you in terms of the research that you've done and the experiments that you've done on yourself? What are you most surprised by?
Well, I think I'm most surprised by how organization of a certain of the day of certain tasks of the to-do list can actually have the biggest impact on cognitive performance. And I'm a big proponent of this. Even though my whole shtick is nootropics, everybody who works with me, I tell them first start with like what your habits are. So for example, like making sure that I have a set number of hours of deep work, uninterrupted work with no phone calls, no emails, that has been by far the biggest boon to my success from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Good.
And just allowing me the lifestyle where I'm fulfilled in the work that I'm doing, and even free to do less work than most other people, for example. So
do you find, I know you've traveled a lot this past year, do you find that the nootropic phenomena is global, or do you find that it's very geared towards the American market at the moment?
I think it's becoming global from purely the people who consistently get in touch with me on my site. People all over the world. I mean, Saudi Arabia, Iran, even.
Nice.
You know,
Wow.
I mean, sure, people in Iran want to enhance their performance as well, but it's kind of it's striking to get emails
it's not
from
what you
them.
expect off. Yeah, it'd be like Germans or something.
Right, exactly, yeah. But yeah, it seems to be a pretty universal phenomenon. I think it's still growing rapidly. I don't think the term nootropics have even close to entered the mainstream.
Yeah.
But there's certain sub-communities where it's, you know, becoming popular thanks to, you know, people like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey, things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's still relatively niche, and so it's exciting for me because I'm kind of on the tip of the spear, and hopefully helping to inform the decisions that people make or inform the discussions that people have about nootropics. But it's I do believe it's global, but within certain communities.
Yeah. Now you spent 30 days of your life hard charging to write a book. Fairly recently. Is the book done yet?
Yeah, it's done. It's actually, as of today, just...
Oh, congratulations.
The book is done. All the editing, all the designing, the layouts, and all that stuff is done.
Nice.
As of today, I just ordered my copies, and they'll be going to Amazon. The Kindle's in there, and then the audiobook.
So it's going to be more than just a ebook. You're doing hard copies of this bad boy.
Yeah, soft cover.
Nice.
I think that there's some value in reading the actual
physical book. Totally.
And beyond that, I think there's a lot of perceived value in a softcover book. It's not that I want to trick anybody, but ebooks are kind of a dime a dozen these days.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want people to have at least the opportunity to get something in their hands that they can read. Yeah,
and the fact that people can read it and then share it, and there's just this much more visceral kind of experience with a book, a physical book. So tell me more about that experience. That's a pretty ambitious goal, and you made a documentary in the process. So you traveled around, you did interviews, you were writing on the road as well, or how did this all work? How did you manage to do all these things simultaneously?
Well, it was an incredibly naive undertaking. I kind of had this idea I should do a documentary on nootropics. There's nothing that exists like that. And then it kind of turned into, actually, I should do a documentary about, using them. What am I going to do? Well, I'm a writer. I might as well write a book. And so it kind of was a circuitous path to that, challenge. And realistically, I did a significant portion of writing the first week. I just kind of put my nose down on our first stop on our road trip in Arkansas and just wrote as much as I could to kind of get ahead. But to kind of give a summary of the project, we went on a 3 to 5 week road trip and started off in Arkansas. We went to New Mexico, Arizona, and California to do interviews, and I wrote the book in 30 days, but it was kind of heavily segmented the first week, and then kind of the last week I did the most. Went to speak with some experts, like we've got Dave Asprey, Jamie Wheel, who wrote Stealing Fire, and then neuroscientists at Peak Brain Institute and Daniel Schmachtenberger. So just some really valuable insight from some experts while we were in California. And I kind of created a plan to film certain things like daily updates and certain interviews and things like that. But once I got back to Austin, I quickly realized I didn't have the capabilities to edit it myself. Right. So I brought on a producer to put together the documentary, and that was kind of the biggest cost expenditure. But other than that, it was very bootstrapped, very self-funded, self-created, and Yeah, we're getting to see the fruits of the labor now with the documentary and the
Yeah.
screenings coming out and the
That's
book. Kind of the darker side to it was it was just a lot of stress and using some nootropics that kind of activated my adrenal system and my fight or flight system, kind of amplified that even more. And the combination of doing all those things and to some extent living in my girlfriend's Forerunner
Right.
really put her and I at odds.
Yeah.
And that rift took a long time to mend, and it's still on the mend now.
Right.
So that was kind of the dark side of the project.
Yeah, you paid a price for that intense level of productivity.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think about, and have you explored and or experimented with psychedelic plants and things of that nature, and how do you factor that into brain chemistry? There's a lot more sort of legitimate research that seems to be popping up from people who are actually have the letters behind their name, who are putting energy and emphasis on that subject. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of using psychedelics. I think a full dose of LSD or any of these kinds of experiences with psilocybin, mescaline, even ayahuasca, I believe are tremendous from both an emotional perspective, helping to rewire the brain.
Yeah.
A lot of studies show with like addiction symptoms can be completely removed using some of these psychedelics. Mystical experiences are there's a number of studies that show people who use like psilocybin after 14 months even they find that the experience was one of the top mystical experiences of their life. And this is what I call in my book like radical cognitive enhancement, because it is something that's so jarring to the brain that it isn't forgotten.
Right.
We can take some caffeine to be more focused and concentrated, but the days blur together.
Right.
They're all the same. But when you do ayahuasca, it's something you don't forget. Same with psilocybin. So I'm a really big proponent of it. It's now we're starting to see Dr. Carhart Harris in the United Kingdom is producing studies of fMRI showing the brain on psilocybin and LSD and how it helps with anxiety and depression.
Right.
Even 1966, Dr. James Fadiman had studies on microdosing. So he brought in, these are physicists, engineers, mathematicians. He brought in like 40 different people, or I think it was 37 or 27 different people who had really challenging problems that they couldn't solve for months, sometimes years.
Right.
And he gave them a microdose of mescaline, and 44% of this group had solutions to their problems. And these are like, they became patents, they became hypotheses, theories, and principles in science. And so these are tangible results, problem solving results from microdosing. So that's why you see Silicon Valley is just using microdosing like crazy. Wall Street, even the London tech scene is kind of it's blowing up there. So I'm a big fan of both the radical usage and then also the kind of like big doses, like mega doses or whatever.
Fully therapeutic, transformative doses.
And then also the microdoses for the more day-to-day regimens. It's kind of a shame that not only are they illegal, but that research is kind of moving so slowly, and it's focused so much on people who are already like sick, like depressed, or already super anxious. But hey, we'll take what we can get, and we'll hope that helps move the conversation forward.
And none of those things ever. It's a sad state of affairs, but the governmental organizations are never the ones really leading the charge towards progress. It just becomes a subject, a national subject that they just can't ignore anymore, and then somebody has to make a decision because there's enough pressure on them, just like the marijuana issue. The fact that, we start to go in reverse on some of these issues just blows my mind, but that's a whole other topic. So what are you most excited about in the future? Like, what's coming up for you? I know you're doing a series of showings of this film that's coming up in a couple of different cities, right? And then you're releasing the book. Are you, how are you going to go about releasing that? Are you going to do like a book tour, or are you going to try to just keep it more in the internet space and keep it local? Or how are you handling some of those things?
Yeah, I think the documentary is going to be free. The screenings that I'm going to do in San Francisco, LA, San Diego, and Austin are going to be as much to bring like-minded individuals together and meet them and really engage with like-minded indivials.
Create a community,
yeah, exactly.
Or enhance the community.
Yeah. So and also be a leader of that community.
Totally.
So I'm not really going to profit much from the screenings themselves, but to some degree the documentary ends up being an advertisement for the book, because I'm writing a book in 30 days.
Totally.
And so the book is going to be for sale. I'll have books with me when I do the screenings.
Right.
But after a few months, I'm probably gonna take that book and turn it into a real focused digital funnel, so that I can get the book to as many people as possible, but also just get them to engage with my content on a physical level.
Right.
Not only they're watching videos and reading things from me, but they have a book of mine in their hands at their house. And then just bring people in. I'm going to start doing courses using nootropics to help people with productivity, with anxiety, things like that. And really, my experience in prison, my experience bettering myself in general has kind of given me a ton of different tools. And so people listen to me because of the nootropics, but I want to use that to kind of sell them what they want and give them what they need.
Yeah.
You kind of bring in, okay, you want more productivity, maybe you need to be sleeping more, maybe you need to organize your routine, have a to-do list, organize your calendar, things that really aren't super related to nootropics, but kind of combine them, so just help improve people.
The overall system.
Exactly.
Really. Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the lessons. How long were you in prison?
So I was in prison for 6 months.
6 months. Yeah. I think that's about how long my brother was in prison. And what were your major takeaways from that? That you not only came out of it immediately and were okay, I'm going to do things differently. How that happens. Same way when people get sick sometimes, I'm going to do things, Lord, I'm going to do things different, And then, a couple months later, they're just doing the same shit they've always done. So what were the lessons that really lasted for you from that experience?
Well, I think for one, there was just a sense of self-confidence that, holy shit, I made that. I did it.
You did it.
And especially I come back to a world where nobody has really been to prison. I mean, they may have been to jail for a night for DWI or something, but no one's been to prison,
right.
which is very different from jail. And, suddenly it's just a different, situation interacting with people who've never done it. And there's just kind of a sense of pride that I survived it.
Sure. It's kind of like being in combat.
Right.
Yeah. If you're a vet, you've got a certain leg up maybe on your average person in terms of perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
So, just the general confidence was one. I think gratitude was such another component to it, because I really got to know a lot of these people who came from much less, who were in prison for much longer, for much less crimes. And, these are people who just didn't have the funds for lawyers. They just they just kind of got screwed in every possible way.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky in my situation. I got really lucky to have the education that I had. I was really lucky to have the parents that raised me.
Yeah.
So it's really easy now when something's going wrong, to just look back and remember, there was a time when I had nothing more than an orange jumpsuit that I was wearing.
Right.
And, I had no freedom. I had no, anything.
Yeah.
I literally had no possessions. And so the gratitude has probably been, the second big thing. And then I'd say third would have to be kind of doing the best you can with what you've got. Because when I was in there, there was a long time where I fought it and I didn't want to be there, and I was like, when am I gonna get out? How am I gonna get, not escape, but I mean, like, how am I
my way out of here?
how am I gonna get my lawyers to finagle my way out?
Yep.
And it wasn't until I finally just surrendered to the experience and realized I'm here, and every single day that I have is 24 hours that I have to maximize, because one day I'm going to get out. And when I do get out, I'm either going to be very mentally prepared and physically prepared for what's to come, or I'm going to be woefully unprepared. And so I started waking up really early. I started fasting, intermittent fasting. I started working out, religiously. I worked in the library, so I was really lucky that I could have access to so many books, and I was just churning through books, like of all types: history, self-improvement, classics, like anything but fiction books.
Right.
I was reading. Yeah. So that self-reliance and self-responsibility, it was really a big component.
What put you on the entrepreneur path in the first place? Are your parents entrepreneurs, or are they kind of 9-to-5ers, or what got you started on that road?
Yeah, not from my parents, that's for sure. They're both scientists. They both have PhDs, and my dad works for the government, 9-to-5, very stable job and income. My mom works for a private company, 9-to-5.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurship wasn't really something I grew up thinking was an option. It didn't really enter my consciousness much until I was arrested, and a different kind of story, which I now realize is not true, started to play out in my head, which was, I've been arrested, and then later I'm a felon. No one's gonna give me a job, so I have to create one myself.
Yeah.
And that I've now found is not true, because there's tons of people who know I went to prison, and they're like throwing money at me to try and like get me to work with them and stuff.
Right.
But it was good that was there.
It's the mother of invention, right? Yeah.
And so that kind of catalyzed the entrepreneurial journey, and it's funny, like entrepreneurship and self-improvement go so hand in hand.
Totally.
It just kind of like snowballed, got bigger, better, and they kind of were synergistic with each other. So yeah. And you've been at it now for how many years, would you say? I'd say it's been at least 6 years now.
6 years?
Yeah. If you can include the 6 months I was in prison, because
Sure.
I was actually on the phone with the manager of my e-commerce business, like running promotions and still doing all that stuff from in there. So
for any sort of aspiring or young entrepreneurs or old entrepreneurs who are just wanting to get into the game, what do you think, from your experience, are the most important things to consider before embarking on that journey, and once you get on that journey, what things would you recommend, and what things would you do differently?
Well, for one, I really want people to question whether they want to be an entrepreneur more than anything, because it's become incredibly sexy to be an entrepreneur these days.
Right.
And the truth is, you can live the life and the lifestyle that you want without being an entrepreneur. There's plenty of jobs now that offer remote work.
Yeah.
You can have a relatively, quote unquote stable job, but still have the lifestyle that you want.
Still have a certain amount of freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
And that might be less of a headache, especially if you have kids, especially, all these kinds of factors that are involved with age, etc. So really consider what you want, because it could be super sexy to just go down the path of, being an entrepreneur.
And totally unnecessary.
Right.
For
Absolutely.
what you're really looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say is be very conscientious with how you spend money as an entrepreneur, because I see a few different things. One is people who call themselves entrepreneurs, but they're not willing to make the personal sacrifices to be an entrepreneur, and so they end up racking up $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 of personal debt,
right,
because they haven't changed their lifestyle habits.
Right.
Sometimes debt in order to start a business is okay, and it's just part of the game. I'm not saying people can't do that or that they're bad if they do that, but if you're not making the sacrifices to do that, then not only are you kind of missing the objective with what you're trying to create, but you're also missing an incredible learning experience.
Yeah.
Because if you cannot control your spending when you're just starting out as an entrepreneur trying to make shit happen, what are you going to do when you actually start making a lot of money?
If you actually do get to the point where you're pulling in significant amounts of cash. It's just like, I had a friend when I was in high school whose mother won the lottery, and they were just kind of lower, I would say, lower middle class family, and they blew through that money like it was a quart of ice cream, and we're basically kind of, it's the kind of typical saying about that situation, but they ended up sort of worse off than when they started with the money. I think it wasn't lottery. It was probably, it might have been an inheritance. And that happens a lot. It's just like if you can't be responsible for a little, you will not be responsible for a lot. And I think to your point, if you can leverage debt to fund your business, which is specific to the runnings and workings of your business, with a real plan or system towards recouping that debt, versus using debt to leverage a lifestyle so that you can pretend you're an entrepreneur and kind of just run that whole racket, but not really be funding those things that have an ROI attached to them, and I think that's kind of the difference between a guy like you who can leverage some credit cards and pull off some bigger things and have that turn out to be profitable over time, versus somebody who's just deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole, and then bankruptcy,
right, or
whatever.
Man, it's sad to see some of the people that are just friends that have kind of gone down that rabbit hole, but I think it's sometimes unfortunately kind of easy to do so. I think just being conscientious of spending, because it is really such a gift to learn that lesson, to live those trials for one's own self-mastery, for one's own building like stoicism, resilience, like all these different things that actually make life better. You lose that if you don't go through the hard times, in the early stage.
Times.
Right.
Yeah.
And the counterpoint to that is, there's an old, I don't know if it's Buddhist or just Eastern belief, but lily pads, sometimes they take 30 days to rise above the surface in a pond, and if you look on day 29, you might see one lily pad. So day 1, nothing. All the way to day 29, you see only one lily pad. Then day 30, the whole pond's filled with lily pads.
Interesting.
Because it often is just like a certain tipping point of weight before they start to float. And the same can be said of finances or entrepreneurship. honestly, I probably went through a solid 3-4 years of just having a little bit of credit card debt, because I was like hustling and things weren't working, or they were, but they just weren't working enough. And I always consistently had like maybe $1,000 to $3,000 of credit card debt on my cards. And then like all of a sudden, one year, everything hit at once, and it was like 5 figures a month now.
Right.
Like, okay, credit card debt's not an
Wiped
issue at all.
away, yeah.
But it was, it all just kind of happened at once, and that's the high risk, high reward game that entrepreneurs often play.
Do you have a sense of what you would like to do if like for me, I know if I had the resources at the moment, I would probably be purchasing a large patch of land to do a lot of community building and that sort of thing on. Do you have a sense of bigger vision? You're clearly not a materialist, given where you live and what you drive, and you keep things very simple, it seems, and that seems like an intentional choice, not a required choice. So I mean, if you get to the point where you're really rocking a lot of dough, where would that go? What would you do with it? How would you make an impact with that kind of influence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm kind of just starting to scratch the surface of that question myself, kind of realizing that I want to contribute in some way. So this year I'm contributing at least 3 different projects that I want to give back in some way. It's hard to say what it would look like, because I try to lead my life without any kind, like I try and lead it exactly the way that I want it to. And so if money wasn't an issue, I would kind of feel like I would be doing the same thing. I'd be educating people, I'd be creating more resources. I might spend more time in seclusion. I might go on some hunts, some longer hunts to kind of just like be secluded. I might do a lot more writing in nature, kind of the Walden Pond, writing scenario. So I really have to put some time into that. I feel a desire to give back, and at the same time, it's this constant like struggle of, this is what I want to do. Why am I not doing it already?
Right.
Let's just do it now.
Yeah, right.
And then kind of cycle. But it's kind of one of those things also where I just don't know until I have that situation where it's just can I curse in here?
Yeah.
Where I have that fuck you money.
Yeah.
And when I have that, then things might become more clear with what I want to achieve.
This is one of the things, a little test that I do with myself, probably multiple times a year as needed, but it's kind of the deathbed confessional, which is if I know my time is limited to whatever that arbitrary time is, whether it's a day or a week or a month. It's the question of what do you want to leave behind as your legacy, and what do you want inscribed on your tombstone, so to speak, or what is that thing that you would be laying in bed regretting not having done? And I think that's just such a centering point for me, that even just this last year, and then really the podcast is kind of a byproduct of that, of just saying, for me it's important to leave a body of work behind, and generally creative work is what I'm more prone towards, but to offer something to the conversation, offer something inspirational, something educational, something, even with the entertainment stuff, I hope it's more than just sort of pop entertainment, so to speak, sort of more disposable, but for me with music, the stuff that really has been transformative, it's been therapy, it's been the kind of stuff that gets me through the tough times. I mean, those have been certain songwriters in my life and certain songs in my life, so I think that's the kind of legacy as a musician I would want to leave what would I want to leave as a human, just as a person, or as a father, or as a partner, or as a friend, or So I think that's where that question comes into play for me, is like the idea of doing what we're doing with North Austin Sanctuary is a byproduct of having the greater vision that I would like to do if money was no object. But I've got what I've got now, and I have to work with what I've got instead of waiting for the perfect stars to align and the perfect situation to arise to actually start. It's kind of like, well, just start, just go in that direction. And so I'm always curious what other people's deathbed confessional is, basically.
Honestly, one thing that comes up for me, which maybe it's only this way because I don't have kids yet, but the idea of having all the resources that I would need and then having a child that seems so special to me, because now I have a child. So many people have children, and unfortunately they literally spend their entire waking days at work,
right,
and away from the child.
Totally.
Imagine, a situation where financially everything's covered, you really just get to do what you want to do.
Totally.
And you have a child.
Yeah.
Well, you can do anything that you want to mold that child into, the I hesitate to say like the best possible, thing, but just give them all those experiences.
Totally.
The everything that you could really dream of. You can do that because you've got the time,
and the
money.
resources. Yeah. Well, and that's a double-edged sword, as you know, because I think so many of the great people who we respect and admire as entrepreneurs, artists, creatives, people who are in that top percent of output and inspiration, are often a byproduct of not that, often a byproduct of the opposite of that. And I've relatives and people that I've known in my circle who the money was certainly no issue, and that led to a very spoiled, a very really dysfunctional way of operating in the world. Now that said, it was also probably money as a compensation for lack of time. So I have another friend who kind of has both. They have plenty of money, and he works from home, so he has got a lot of time, and he gets to spend just a lot of time with his kids. They both do, because she doesn't have to work. So it's time will tell, but I think the loving presence of both parents does a lot to that is probably more important. It is not probably, it is more important than the money aspect, because there are plenty of really great hippie parents who live life very simply and keep costs down and adjust their life and spending according to having time and presence to give to their children versus material things and certain kinds of experiences that may be beyond their means, but they're getting a lot of other experiences that other kids wouldn't necessarily have access to. Maybe be living closer to the earth. Being involved in producing your own food and raising chickens, and just really fundamental kind of survival things, but not in the sense that it's a concern. Where you're like concerned for your welfare, but it's just a real direct way of providing for yourself, and that ends up being, I think, a fairly profound experience that really every human would benefit from. I mean, just like we had the conversation the other day about you going hunting for the first time. That's something I grew up with, and I'm so grateful that was just a part of my experience, that the wilderness was a part of my experience, and that my role in that economy, the natural economy, is just really important for perspective as a human being to know. It's like I would always measure people not by titles, but it's like if you were stripped of all your stuff and all your clothes and all your titles and thrown out into these here woods, how long would you last? Like, that's my measure of you, as a human, as a developed human being, not, whatever titles connect to your name or any of those kinds of things. And I find the people who really do have that connection are so much more humble and so much more grounded and so much more human, to be honest.
Yeah, that really brings up, like, the hunting, the outdoors stuff really brings up another thing that I'm passionate about right now. We'll see, how long that lasts.
Yeah.
But, I think masculinity and men and boys specifically are kind of under attack right now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say attack like in a victim mindset, but I do believe that there's a lot of things lacking in how boys are raised.
Totally.
I think that there's a lot of political correctness that really gets in the way of men expressing themselves fully.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that I hope to be a voice to rectify.
Mm-hmm.
I've already noticed a lot of, I've gotten a lot of flack, and it's been edgy,
Wow.
to have certain conversations about masculinity and men's rights in quotes.
Sure.
And so that's the kind of that's kind of a guiding barometer. It's kind of like, oh, it's edgy and people don't like this.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe I need to go more
Clearly
into
there's
this
something
direction.
here.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would be an example of that?
An example of the men's rights, or just the work that I would do?
Just something that it has been provocative that you've noticed in circles of communication and whatnot.
Well, I mean, certain good friends of mine, females, whom I mention the idea of men's rights, and they just start laughing hysterically, or just like completely, disregarding that concept.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of so-called feminists, I would consider myself a feminist as well, but a lot of so-called feminists seem to want, more power to be to females than males, as opposed to
an equal
distribution.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've run into that a couple of times. And then the unfortunate thing is, even men.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke with a guy who, he's a father of 3, and his wife took the kids, and he now is by himself, and he sees his kids once every other week. And I brought up the idea of men's rights to him, and he didn't get it. And then I went on to explain men get the bad end of almost every single divorce, every single child, legal
Custody
situation.
issue,
we get the raw end of it every single time. And I think those are just a few of the issues. Some of the issues even overlap with what I'm doing with the brain. Like, boys' brains develop differently than girls.
Totally.
And when
you're trying to stuff that all into, like, oh, everybody's the same, we're all just treat everybody, quote unquote, equally. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, because no one from gender to gender, from across gender, everyone's just so unique. Everyone's so unique. I mean, there are similarities, clearly, as there is in any species, but there's just such diversity in, even when we choose a language, this symbolic symbolism that we use to communicate to each other, and how different, this now being in a relationship for a period of time where you feel like you're using the words that make sense and that they're both understood in the same way, and then you realize that you're not being understood in the way that what you're trying to articulate is not being received, based on the words that you assume mean what you think they mean, and that they think they mean the same thing because you both went to the same, you learned the same language in school or whatever. Definitions, you both read Webster's. So it's an interesting thing to just really get inside of that, and how much more when you have cultural differences, how much more when you have linguistic differences, how much more when you have a difference in state from one moment to another, where your head may be in a totally different space from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., how you're going to receive data and translate that, through your own filters.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the simple example is like, you tell a child, use your words. I hear it all the time with kids. Use your words, use your words. Well, two kids of the same age, male and female, like the male, their linguistic regions of the brain developed much slower than females. So you're telling a boy from the get-go, like, do something that you're gonna be challenged at compared to a female, and then we compare them. Like, girls are better than boys. They mind their manners. They're more polite. They're whatever. It just comes down to not treating the uniqueness of each person, whether it be with nootropics I could talk about, or whether it be with just learning and things like that.
Behaviors. Yeah. Well, and that's what I like about the more progressive schools. It seems like that there's such a much more fundamental emphasis on the learning capacity of each individual kid, instead of like, I can't speak for you, but for me, it's just line up in the desks and sit there and listen to the squawk box at the front of the at the front of the room, and either tune out or start drawing and noodling and doing your own thing, or be the one who actually is attentive and learns that way without having to actually physically engage the material, that they can just listen and repeat like a parrot, kind of thing. And so it's just there's a million ways, and I think through the industrialization mentality, we've all kind of been forced into this very cattle, what do you call it, not the trough, but the when they're sending them down the chute, the cattle chute, we've been forced into that way of many things, of the way we work, the way we eat, the way we do relationships, the way we educate. I mean, these things are clearly starting to break apart. But it's also about resources, when you have so many people, how do you enable that kind of individuality? Like, how do you really attend to that? And that really kind of speaks to all of us being participants in the whole experience, of each one teach one kind of mentality, of everybody's sort of each other's keeper on some level. If you have something valuable that may save somebody else some time or some resources or some beatings, you're obliged to maybe offer that up as a gift or a service, to move that energy, pay it forward or pay it backward or whatever, whatever direction to sort of move the whole tribe along, the whole human tribe along. And I think, that is the benefit of the internet, and in spite of so many other things that confuse and confound people about it, it does empower people to do a lot of research and filter through, and as much as they can filter through, and try and go for a much more meta truth than maybe what is obviously spoon-fed to everybody, is like, oh, no, we know, and this is it, and you just listen to us, we got all the answers. It's like, it's really what's happening. I mean, it's kind of expanding on the subject, but it's really in some, I can see why people are really disturbed by everything that's happening in the world, the politics and the sort of just many things going on in the world that are disturbing for sure. But what you also see is a sort of fragmentation of this idea of trusting the authority, whether it's trusting your medical authority or trusting the president, or it's like all of these people who are lords of the human species, who are telling you how it is and how it should be, the curtain has been pulled back to reveal how ignorant most of them are as well, and so it falls upon us, your average human being, to actually take responsibility for all those things now and actually be civically engaged, whether it's officially through some political channel or just being a better person, a more empathetic person, a more educated person, a more with a person with a broader perspective. And I think energetically these kinds of troubles that come in waves, I think with any civilization, tend to heighten certain aspects, and and then the opposite also has its day, and that those energies kind of just wave back and forth to each other somehow. But I don't, it'll be interesting to see where that all shakes out. I don't exactly know,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been really blessed. Obviously, we talked about entrepreneurship, and that's, it's been great to be marginally successful from a financial perspective, but I have a folder it's called the folder of, like, awesome shit people say when I feel like I haven't done anything right. And it's just, like, different emails and YouTube comments and just all these different things of people who are like, wow, this stuff really helped me, like I just stopped using Adderall because of this, and stuff like that. So that whole, you're talking about, like, pay it forward kind of thing, like, that is such a powerful currency for fulfillment and happiness.
Totally.
Any entrepreneur, any, like, aspiring entrepreneur out there listening to that, like, try and optimize those messages, because
let them sink in.
Right.
Save them in a folder.
Save them in a folder, because they really do make a difference. They make a difference for keeping up the hard fight when it's tough.
Yeah.
And they make a difference for the world. I mean, that is people actually, like, telling you that what you're doing in the world matters. So
and then when you get hit some morning with a hater's comment or something like that, you can go back to the file and find some respite in the fact that that people are positively infected. I mean, I think that's the thing that everybody of any amount of success has said, is that if you don't have some, what is there's some quote about that, actually. It's something like, a man is measured by the enemies he has. Like, how powerful are your enemies?
Yeah. That's
basically the measure. That's kind of like one of those old school quotes of, like, if you've got powerful enemies, that means you're doing something right, probably. Or you're doing something really, really wrong, too. That could be the case.
Yeah.
Either way, you're doing something big. At least you're doing something big.
Yeah.
But hey, all right, we're running out of time, so we'll wrap it up. But before we go, I want to get your website so that people who are listening to this can go check out all the different projects that you're working on. So just drop those down. What do you got?
Yeah, so if they want to go to the main hub, it's called Nootropedia.com, Nootropedia.com, and sign up for the email newsletter, because I do these things called Think Smart Thursday, where I just kind of break down a new study or a new conversation or some new product that I'm using, biohack that I'm testing, and people really, really like these, because it's really just, it's like a blend of nootropics, biohacking, but also just, like, my own personal beliefs, and people who resonate with me tend to, like, really like it, because I'll talk about, like, esoteric stuff that's not really nootropic related. So that's cool if you sign up to the email list. And then videos, if you like videos, if that's your medium, just do a search for my name on YouTube, Mansal, last name Denton, Denton, and find, like, over 80 videos on various brain related topics.
Nice.
And you'll find my book and documentary relatively simply as well. So,
nice. Is there a page up for those yet?
Yeah, you can go to the book and the documentary. They're both called Ahead Above. And the documentary, you just go to aheadabovedocumentary.com.
Cool.
And the book, aheadabovebook.com.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, Mansal.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, man. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, buddy.
Peace.
Hey, if you like what you hear on this podcast, go ahead and check out our website, thewisdomdistillery.net. And you can check out the profiles on the guests that we have on the show, learn more about me and what I'm doing, and maybe even pitch your own story, and we'll have a podcast with you if you're so inclined. And if you like the music that you heard on this podcast, the first song was by yours truly. It's called As Good As Your Yesterday. And the song that you're currently listening to is called Sneaking on September by an artist named Otis McDonald. All right, peoples, I want to thank you for giving your attention and time and presence. I know it is in short supply these days, so thank you very much. You can check out my music at shamanjohnmusic.com. That's Shaman, ShamanJon, music.com. And you can check out the podcast at thewisdomdistillery.net. We'll catch you on the next go around. Peace!